A humid night on Spain's Costa del Sol. Outside a packed Irish pub in Fungarola, cheers erupt as the Champions League final ends. Among the revelers are two middle-aged Scots nursing pints, Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons Jr., lifelong friends enjoying a taste of home under the Spanish neon. They smile and embrace in celebration. But in the crowd, a pair of unfamiliar women watch them intently, eyes on their every move. Moments later, a masked figure strides toward the pub entrance, pistol in hand. The flash of gunfire cuts through the balmy air. Monaghan and Lyons Jr. fall to the floor amid overturned chairs and shattered glass. Panicked screams echo as vacationers scramble for cover. In the chaos, one of the women calmly speaks into her phone, then slips away. The gunman vanishes into the night. In seconds, two of Scotland's most notorious gangland figures lie dying on the tiled floor, victims of a brazen double assassination. This shocking hit, carried out in front of sun-soaked holidaymakers, was no random robbery or drunken brawl gone wrong. It was the latest chapter in a 24-year war that has turned city streets into battlefields from Glasgow to Spain. A war between two criminal clans whose feud spans generations and now continents. The Lyons versus the Daniel crime family. To understand how a Scottish underworld vendetta led to bloodshed on the Costa del Sol, we must trace its origins back to the grey streets of North Glasgow in the early 2000s. In the housing estates of Postle Park and Milton, two families vied for underworld dominance. On one side, the Daniel crime clan, long established in drug trafficking and extortion under patriarch Jamie Daniel, a sly godfather with a network of enforcers. On the other, the upstart Lyons family, led by ambitious young mobster Stephen Lyons, eager to muscle in on the drug trade. The spark that ignited their feud was a simple act of betrayal. In 2001, a large consignment of high-purity cocaine, property of the Daniel clan, was stolen from a safe house in Milton. The thieves, allegedly Eddie Lyons Jr. and his close friend Ross Monaghan, promptly sold the stash for profit, effectively ripping off the Daniels on their own turf. It was a monumental insult and a loss of income that Jamie Daniel could not let slide. A blood feud was born. Whispers on Glasgow's streets soon spoke of brewing war. The Daniels and Lyons had once been friendly enough to attend the same social clubs. Now they were arming themselves, recruiting local hard men and stockpiling weapons. Stephen Lyons forged alliances abroad. Jamie Daniel, a veteran of Glasgow's underworld, called on family and longtime cronies for backup. Caught in the middle were ordinary Glaswegians, shopkeepers, taxi drivers, young teenagers living in neighborhoods about to become combat zones. The feud's first public eruptions were as theatrical as they were vicious. In late 2006, Kevin Carroll, the Daniel clan's notorious enforcer, decided to send a message to the Lyons. Under cover of darkness, Carroll drove a stolen car into the cemetery and toppled the headstone of Eddie Lyons Jr.'s 8-year-old brother, who had died of leukemia years before. The headstone shattered, a shockingly personal insult and a warning that the Daniels would stop at nothing. The desecration infuriated the Lyons family. It was now deeply personal. This wasn't only about drugs or money, but honor and revenge. Weeks later, in December 2006, retribution came. On a cold afternoon at Apple Row Motors, a family-run garage in Lambhill frequented by Lyons associates, two men in long black coats strolled onto the forecourt. Without a word, they produced handguns and opened fire on their targets in broad daylight. Bullets riddled the garage. When the smoke cleared, Michael Lyons, Eddie Jr.'s cousin, lay dead, and two others were badly wounded. The hitmen, later identified as Daniel clan foot soldiers, allegedly working on Carroll's orders, sped away, leaving carnage behind. The Apple Row ambush was a turning point. The Lyons-Daniel feud had erupted into open warfare on Glasgow's streets. At Michael Lyons' funeral, family members swore revenge through gritted teeth. Retaliation would bide its time, but it was coming. Jamie Daniel, emboldened by the strike, doubled down on security and paranoia. His enforcer, Kevin Carroll, became even more ruthless, abducting rivals, a tactic so feared it earned the nickname Alien Abductions, attacking properties and stalking Lyons loyalists around the city. Glasgow tabloids began charting the violence, dubbing it an all-out gangland feud. But the bloodiest was yet to come. On a bitter January afternoon in 2010, shoppers at an Asda supermarket in the suburb of Robroyston suddenly heard gunshots crack through the cold air. In the parking lot, Kevin Carroll, the Daniel clan's most feared enforcer, was ambushed in his Audi by a masked gunman. Panicked witnesses watched as the shooter riddled Carroll with bullets at close range. Within 25 seconds, it was over. The Gerbil was slumped dead in the driver's seat, assassinated in broad daylight. The audacity was stunning, a Gangland figure killed in a busy store car park in front of families and commuters. Police later described the scene as something out of a mob movie. Suspicion immediately fell on the Lyons camp. Ross Monaghan, then a loyal Lyons foot soldier and close friend of Eddie Jr., was arrested and charged with Carroll's murder. Prosecutors alleged Monaghan had planned the hit as payback for Michael Lyons' slaying and other Daniel offences. The trial gripped Scotland, but ended in dramatic fashion. In 2012, after key evidence was deemed insufficient, Ross Monaghan was acquitted of murder, walking free with a smile. The Daniels were furious. Their attack dog Gerbil was dead, and no one was held accountable. On Glasgow's estates, word was the Lyons had just pulled off the ultimate revenge and gotten away with it. The feud, far from cooling, entered a new and even more chaotic phase. Throughout the 2010s, tit-for-tat violence became a dark routine. Cars were torched in midnight firebombings. Drive-by shootings erupted outside pubs and gyms frequented by gang members. Once, Lyons affiliates allegedly rammed a Daniel family car off the road on a highway, then leapt out with blades, leaving one rival with horrific facial wounds. The victim barely survived, scarred for life in a modern-day Glasgow smile carved by a machete. On the other side, Daniel foot soldiers targeted Lyons safe houses in gun attacks and planted crude pipe bombs outside the homes of known associates. Each incident begot the next, an endless vendetta. By 2016, Jamie Daniel, the Daniel patriarch, died of natural causes, in a hospital bed, not on the street, surprisingly. But any hope that the feud would die with the old guard was misplaced. The mantle simply passed to the next in line. Various Daniel family members and associates in one camp, and the Lyons crew, now essentially led day to day by Eddie Lyons Jr. and Ross Monaghan on behalf of Stephen Lyons, in the other. The younger generation was every bit as determined to settle scores. One clear winter morning in January 2017, the feud's brutality nearly claimed Ross Monaghan in front of the most innocent of bystanders. As Monaghan pulled into the parking lot of St. George's Primary School in Penilly to drop off his 6-year-old daughter, a hooded gunman emerged from between parked cars. Parents and children looked on in horror as gunfire erupted by the school gates. Monaghan took a bullet to the shoulder and collapsed, bleeding, as the attacker fled. Screams of schoolchildren rang out. The unthinkable had happened, gangland violence spilling into a playground. Miraculously, Monaghan survived the wound, but the message was crystal clear. The Daniel side, now spearheaded by a mix of family loyalists and hired guns, wanted Monaghan dead, no matter the collateral risk. In the aftermath, police swarmed the scene amid public outcry. Who would attempt such a hit in front of kids? Investigators quietly suspected it was the work of Mark Richardson, an Edinburgh-based mob boss aligned with the Daniel faction. Richardson, a cocaine kingpin known for brutal efficiency, had allegedly orchestrated the failed hit on Monaghan. In fact, he and an accomplice were arrested and charged for the school shooting. Yet, through legal maneuvers, Mark Richardson walked free. Charges against him were dropped later that year due to lack of evidence, though he did serve time on a lesser firearms charge. Still, on the streets, many believed Richardson had been behind the trigger, or at least the plan. This would not be forgotten by the Lyons camp. Reeling from the Schoolyard ambush, Ross Monaghan made a fateful decision. He fled Scotland. The lifelong Glaswegian packed his bags and slipped away to the one place gangsters have long sought refuge, the sunny Costas of southern Spain. There, on the Costa del Sol, Monaghan hoped to lay low among the thousands of British expats. He wasn't alone. Eddie Lyons Jr. too began spending more time in Spain, wary that he could be next on the hit list back home. By the late 2010s, many top-tier figures on both sides had either been imprisoned or gone into exile abroad. Stephen Lyons, the Lyons family boss, had quietly relocated overseas as well, reportedly bouncing between Spain and the Middle East, even hiding out in Dubai for a spell when police pressure in the UK grew intense. The Daniels faction, meanwhile, suffered internal power struggles after Jamie's death. But one man bridging the gap between the old and new generations was rising fast: Ross Miami McGill. To outsiders, Ross McGill might have seemed like another young Scottish expat living the high life abroad. Designer clothes, luxury cars, and an address in Dubai's glittering Marina district. But behind the flash, Ross Miami McGill was cementing his role as a formidable crime boss. Nicknamed Miami for his taste in flashy shirts and perhaps a stint in the US, McGill was a tech-savvy upstart who grew up admiring old-school gangsters but understood the power of modern networking. He had built his own crew of loyal enforcers, many just scrappy kids from Glasgow and Edinburgh housing schemes, hungry for money and notoriety. McGill's crew adopted the name Tamo Junto, Portuguese for "we're together," a nod to the multicultural influences of an international crime life. This faceless gang of masked youngsters became McGill's strike force back in Scotland, willing to carry out violent attacks on his word. Crucially, Ross McGill wasn't bound by blood to either the Lyons or Daniel families. Instead, he played puppet master in the shadows, forging alliances with remnants of the Daniel clan and other Gangland figures for mutual gain. One of McGill's secret weapons was an informal war council, a group of top-tier crime lords scattered in various countries, some in Dubai alongside him, some in Spain, some even in Scottish prisons, who coordinated strategy. Among them were allegedly figures once loyal to Jamie Daniel and even former rivals. In the fluid modern underworld, yesterday's enemies sometimes became today's partners against a common foe. That foe, increasingly, was Mark Richardson, the very man suspected in the Monaghan school shooting. A cocaine baron from Edinburgh, Richardson had built a criminal empire that extended from the Scottish capital's affluent suburbs into Europe. Even after brushes with the law, he retained influence and soldiers. As McGill's star rose, a deadly rivalry between him and Richardson took shape. By 2023, an all-out shadow war was raging in Edinburgh. A string of arson attacks, car bombings, and shootings all tied to these factions. Late-night firebombs exploded on the driveways of properties linked to Richardson's associates, cars reduced to charred shells. Richardson's henchmen, in turn, allegedly hunted for members of McGill's Tamo Junto crew, vowing to take them out in the desert or wherever they could be found. Edinburgh, usually quieter than gang-heavy Glasgow, was now engulfed in the feud spillover, indicating that the battle was becoming truly national and international. Unlike the old days of tapped landlines and whispered pub meetings, this evolving gang war embraced technology. Encrypted phones and messaging apps became the lifeline of the syndicates. Inside prison cells, smuggled smartphones allowed incarcerated shot callers to stay in the game. Inmates at HMP Perth, a facility holding several high-profile gang members, were caught with illicit devices used to coordinate attacks outside. On tiny screens under the dim light of a cell bunk, orders were typed in code via Signal, an encrypted chat app. From behind bars, gang bosses could still reach into the streets, selecting targets, arranging weapons, scheduling the next strike, all with relative impunity and secrecy. It was as if prison walls did not exist. The feud raged on through text messages shielded by encryption. Back in the open world, gangsters also turned to social media, sometimes in unexpected ways. They knew police watched their communications, so they found creative avenues to taunt and challenge rivals. Teenagers affiliated with Tamo Junto started posting TikTok videos flaunting wads of cash and machetes to a soundtrack of drill rap, using slang-filled captions that mocked their enemies. These clips were public enough to be seen by those in the know, yet cryptic enough to avoid outright self-incrimination. It was psychological warfare via hashtags and 15-second videos. Each TikTok or Snapchat post became both a recruiting tool for wannabe gangsters and a red rag to their rivals. What was once handled in smoky backrooms, the threats, the boasting, now played out in the palm of everyone's hand. In one chilling instance, after an assault, masked youths posted a video of themselves in a safe house, faces covered by emoji stickers, laughing and brandishing a blood-stained machete. The caption referenced a local slang term for their rivals and ended with a dark joke hinting at Kevin Carroll's nickname. Within hours, that video was shared in WhatsApp groups across Glasgow's underworld, a modern-day victory howl that authorities struggled to remove before it inspired the next round of violence. Social media had become both a battlefield and a trophy case for the young soldiers of this feud. By spring 2025, the stage was set for a major strike. The Lyons faction, especially Eddie Lyons Jr. and Ross Monaghan, had been living relatively quietly on Spain's Costa del Sol, believing they'd found a haven far from Glasgow's mean streets. Monaghan even opened a little pub in Fungarola, an Irish bar, catering to expats craving pints of lager and UK football on satellite TV. It was an ordinary, breezy life by the Mediterranean, but their enemies had not forgotten them. In fact, plans were brewing to execute them in one fell swoop, and those plans spanned multiple countries. According to Underworld whispers later revealed, a secret summit took place in early 2025 among key figures aligned against the Lyons. Whether in a backroom of a Dubai hotel or a villa on the Spanish coast, figures connected to Mark Richardson and the Daniel clan convened with other crime groups. They shared one common goal: take out Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons Jr., the best friends who were high-ranking Lyons loyalists. This summit of gangland minds set into motion an assassination plot worthy of a thriller, one that would involve female spies, stolen phones, and cross-border coordination. As the Champions League final, a massive European football match, approached on May 31, 2025, Monaghan's bar prepared for a busy night. Unbeknownst to Ross and Eddie, their enemies knew they'd be there. They had inside information. A mole back in Scotland had tipped off the attackers that Eddie Lyons Jr. would be travelling to Fungarola with a group of golfing buddies that week. He and Ross wouldn't miss the big football match at the pub. The plotters secured a professional hitman, a Liverpool-born gunman flown in for the job, and assembled a team of spotters on the ground. Unlikely characters entered the scene, a crew of 7 women from North Glasgow, known locally not for violence but for shoplifting expertise. These women were seasoned pickpockets and thieves who could blend into tourist crowds without raising suspicion. They were flown into Spain and tasked with an essential role: identify and track the targets. In the week leading up to the final, these female spotters roamed the Costa del Sol's pubs, cafes and beaches, using their unassuming appearance to shadow Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons Jr. They even obtained prepaid mobile phones that had been stolen from unsuspecting British holidaymakers weeks prior in nearby resort towns. Why stolen phones? Because they are untraceable burners, perfect for clandestine communication. The night of May 31st, Monaghan's bar was heaving. As Ross and Eddie watched the football match, the spotter women kept eyes on them from different corners of the pub, occasionally snapping surreptitious photos. Outside, the hired killer waited in a car, engine running. The spotters relayed the target's movements using signal on those stolen phones, ensuring their messages couldn't be intercepted. When the final whistle blew and the pub erupted in applause, one spotter, posing as just another tipsy tourist, stepped outside and gave the signal. The targets were in the open, near the entrance. In a flash, the masked gunman stormed in, handgun raised. What happened next was caught on grainy CCTV. Ross Monaghan, sensing danger, tried to dive behind a table, scrambling for cover. But the gunman unleashed a hail of bullets. Monaghan was hit multiple times, a round tearing into his chest as he fell. Eddie Lyons Jr., closer to the door, took a fatal shot almost instantly. Bar patrons dove under tables, drinks spilling, glass shattering. It was over in seconds. The assassin sprinted back to the getaway car where an accomplice, possibly one of the women, awaited. They sped off into the darkness, disappearing down the narrow Spanish streets. Inside Monaghan's bar, a scene of panic and sorrow. Eddie Lyons Jr. lay motionless. Ross Monaghan was barely alive, gasping. In a twist of fate, a British nurse on holiday was in the bar that night. Overcoming her shock, she rushed to Ross's side, cradling his head in her hands. She applied pressure to his wounds and spoke softly to him as his blood pooled on the tile. "Stay with me," she pleaded, as patrons pressed napkins and cloth against the bleeding. But Ross's eyes were fading. The nurse held his hand until his grip loosened, and he slipped away. By the time paramedics arrived, both men were pronounced dead at the scene. Two longtime friends and veteran gangsters executed together in a foreign land. The aftermath was immediate and far-reaching. Spanish police swarmed the area, launching a high-profile murder investigation. The story dominated headlines in Scotland and Spain. Locals on the Costa del Sol, home to many British expats, reacted with a mix of fear and resignation. The ghost of gangland violence had caught up with the Sunshine Paradise once again, reminiscent of the Kinahan-Hutch-Irish cartel feud that had spilled into Spain years prior. Scottish authorities, collaborating with Interpol, quietly began probing whether this hit was linked to the long-running feud back home. Officially, Police Scotland stated there was no intelligence to suggest a direct connection between the Costa del Sol murders and recent gang flare-ups in Scotland, a line likely intended to calm the public. But privately, detectives knew the feud had gone global. Within days, one suspect was in custody. A 44-year-old Liverpudlian man named Michael Riley was arrested by British police at a port in England, accused of being the hired hitman who pulled the trigger. He had allegedly fled Spain via the Portuguese border and made his way home, but an international warrant caught up to him. Riley denied involvement and fought extradition to Spain, leaving many questions unanswered. Meanwhile, intelligence indicated that multiple organized crime groups had cooperated in the scheme, a rare alliance unified by a desire to eliminate Monaghan and Lyons Jr., who were both relatives of key gangland figures. Monaghan, an ally of Stephen Lyons, and Eddie Jr., the son of Lyons clan elder Eddie Lyons Sr. It was the kind of cooperation that can only be forged in the shadows, with trust sealed by mutual hatred. Back in Scotland, the impact of the Costa del Sol bloodbath was like a thunderclap through the underworld. For the Lyons side, it was a devastating blow. Two of their top men gone. Stephen Lyons, still in hiding abroad, was said to be livid and heartbroken, fearful that his faction appeared weakened. For the Daniel camp and their allies, it was a moment of grim satisfaction, yet also anxiety. They had struck a major hit. But at what cost? Retaliation was almost a certainty. In the smoky pubs and street corners of Glasgow and Edinburgh, whispers of revenge began circulating immediately. Funerals for Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons Jr. were held back in Scotland under heavy police watch. Over 500 mourners, a who's who of the Scottish underworld, turned up in black suits and dark sunglasses to pay respects at a crematorium in Bishopbriggs. Tensions ran high. It was as much a show of force as a memorial. Rumours swirled that any known gangster in attendance could be targeted next. Indeed, anonymous threats emerged, warning that gangland mourners themselves might face reprisal attacks at the funerals. Few doubted that tit-for-tat killings on Scottish soil were imminent. That summer of 2025, the violence escalated in unpredictable ways. One particularly savage incident would show just how far the feud's next generation was willing to go. In the quiet suburb of Rutherglen on Glasgow's outskirts, just before dawn one September morning, residents were jolted awake by screams echoing from a block of flats. A masked gang of young men had kicked in the door of a small flat occupied by a 50-year-old man and his pet dog. Armed with machetes and bats, the gang set upon the man in a frenzy. The narrow hallway became a blood-slicked gauntlet as they slashed at him repeatedly, shouting accusations. They claimed this man had helped set up Lyons' men to be hit. Perhaps a reference to tipping off the location of someone like Monaghan, or involvement with the A-Team, a nickname some used for the Daniel crew. The victim's dog barked and leapt to protect its owner, only to catch a glancing blow from a machete itself. The attack was merciless but quick. Neighbors peering through peepholes saw the assailants flee, leaving the man bleeding profusely and the dog whimpering. Within hours, footage of the aftermath hit the internet, but not from any official source. A short video appeared on TikTok, apparently filmed by one of the attackers as they retreated. It showed a gloved hand holding a machete dripping blood and a distorted voiceover saying, "That's what you get. Don't play with us." The next frame was simply text on a black screen. Tamo Junto claims another. No one safe. The clip was taken down after a day, but by then it had circulated on countless Facebook pages and encrypted chats. The message was brazen. Ross McGill's crew openly claimed responsibility for the Rutherglen machete attack, framing it as retaliation and a warning. They had effectively weaponized social media as a tool of intimidation, amplifying the fear far beyond the immediate violence. The Rutherglen victim miraculously survived his injuries, as did his loyal dog, which needed stitches from a local vet. But the psychological impact of the attack and its TikTok broadcast was profound. People in gang-plagued neighborhoods felt that no one was untouchable, not even a low-level associate or someone merely suspected of being an informant. Violence could arrive at anyone's doorstep, and the assailants might very well live-stream the event for the world to see. Meanwhile, Mark Richardson and his associates had gone to ground. Spanish police named Richardson's Edinburgh mob and high-ranking Daniel figures as persons of interest in the Costa del Sol hit. Soon after, reports emerged that several of these individuals fled Scotland, possibly hopping on flights to Dubai or other bolt holes, fearing both police crackdown and Lyons clan retribution. Mark Richardson was said to be moving carefully between safe locations, looking over his shoulder. Underworld chatter suggested he had even put bounties out, seeking to track down members of Ross McGill's War Council, who orchestrated the attacks on his empire. The feud was veering into a multi-sided free-for-all. Through late 2025, Scotland saw a rash of incidents linked to this feud's new chapter. In Edinburgh, cars belonging to family members of known gangsters were torched outside their homes in the dead of night, likely McGill's men targeting anyone connected to Richardson. In Glasgow, a shooting at a takeaway shop narrowly missed a young Lyons associate, bullets peppering the shopfront as customers ducked and screamed. And in the shadows, prison-based operatives continued to pull strings. At HMP Perth, guards conducting a surprise cell search found a cache of contraband. Mini smartphones, SIM cards wrapped in plastic hidden inside a tub of protein powder, and scribbled notes with phone numbers and code words. They believed a network of inmates, allied to both Lyons and Daniel factions, had been coordinating actions outside, including possibly guiding the team of female spotters for the Spain hit and identifying targets for the likes of the Rutherglen attack. Despite constant vigilance, the prisons remained a hive of covert activity, a feud without walls, as one detective dubbed it. What started as a parochial dispute over a stolen drug stash in 2001 has evolved into a hydra-headed conflict that shows no sign of relenting. The Lyons-Daniel feud has proven remarkably adaptive. Where once it was two clear-cut families trading blows, now it's an ever-shifting tapestry of alliances. Old-school crime families, up-and-coming gangsters like Ross McGill, cross-border cartels, and even freelance contract killers form a loose ecosystem of vendetta. The feud has effectively bridged generations. Young men who were toddlers when this war began are now the trigger pullers and getaway drivers. Indoctrinated into a legacy of hatred they only know through stories and social media lore. Modern technology has changed the face of this feud, but not its underlying nature. Encrypted messaging, international travel, and social media theatrics have given the combatants new tools to use, yet the core remains a deadly tit-for-tat rooted in honor, revenge, and greed. A gangster in 2025 might use an iPhone and Telegram instead of a payphone and word of mouth, but he kills for the same reasons his predecessors did. Because the other side killed his friend, stole his business, disrespected his family. Territory now is as much digital as physical. A viral video can claim dominance just like controlling a street corner once did. The geographic scope of the feud has expanded dramatically. No longer confined to the schemes of Glasgow, its tentacles reach Costa del Sol bars, Dubai high-rises, and beyond. The Costa del Sol, in particular, has seen its share of British gangland blood, as it offers both a sanctuary and a hunting ground. The Lyons and Daniel associates found refuge there, but ultimately their war followed. Likewise, Dubai has become a modern neutral ground for figures like Stephen Lyons and Ross McGill, a place to launder money and hide out, even as they plot moves thousands of miles away. The feud's internationalization reflects the globalization of organized crime. Scottish drug routes link to Spanish ports, which connect to Moroccan suppliers and Irish financiers. A feud that once might have been a local turf war now involves multinational crime networks and demands cooperation between Police Scotland, the Spanish Guardia Civil, Interpol, and even law enforcement in the UAE. Culturally, the Lyons versus Daniel saga has cast a long shadow. It's a grim urban legend retold in newspapers, podcasts, and documentaries, a cautionary tale of cycle of violence that has caught the imagination of the public for years. The names of its victims and villains are whispered like folk heroes or monsters. The Gerbil, Miami, the Iceman, Stephen Lyons, Jamie Daniel. In Glasgow's working-class communities, some see them as protectors or local celebrities, others as the very reason their neighborhoods stay mired in fear and poverty. Teenagers coming of age in these areas face a choice: get recruited into one faction or the other, or try desperately to stay neutral. Often a futile effort when postcode loyalty runs deep. Social media, again, has amplified this, with some youngsters disturbingly glorifying gangsters on TikTok fan pages even as bullets fly in their streets. And what of the broader implications? The Lyons-Daniel feud highlights how resilient such criminal vendettas can be. Police crackdowns have led to hundreds of arrests and lengthy incarcerations, yet the feud survives, morphs, and resurges. Each major act of violence begets the next in an endless feedback loop. It raises hard questions for society. How do you break a cycle of revenge that's practically woven into the fabric of these families? Can technology be harnessed to prevent violence rather than incite it? So far, every innovation, encrypted apps, smartphones, social networks, has been co-opted by the gangs to further their own ends. Late 2025, a drizzle falls on Glasgow's Barrowfield as night gathers. In a dingy flat, lit by the glow of a smartphone, a young man scrolls through a Telegram chat, awaiting orders. In Dubai, Ross McGill steps out on a balcony overlooking gleaming skyscrapers, phoning a lieutenant with a simple directive: it's time. Somewhere in a safe house outside Edinburgh, Mark Richardson checks the magazine of a handgun, determined not to be caught off guard, and in a quiet suburb, a mother tucks in her children, praying that tomorrow their walk to school won't be interrupted by gunfire. The Lyons-Daniel feud has lasted a generation, and it threatens to last another. Each time one side claims victory, the other must answer. Each funeral sows the seeds for the next fight. It's a grim equilibrium of violence, sustained by pride, profit from the drug trade, and pure stubborn vengeance. Glasgow's past gang wars eventually faded into history or folklore. The razor gangs of the 1930s, the ice cream van turf wars of the 80s. But this modern conflict is kept alive by global connections and digital age fuel. In the end, the story of the Lyons and the Daniels is a story of escalation. What began with two friends stealing cocaine in 2001 has spiraled into transnational murder plots using female spies and encrypted texts. It's the story of how even the might of law enforcement and the passage of time have struggled to quench the fires of a clan feud. As the camera of this documentary pulls back, we see two cities, Glasgow and Fungarola, each scarred by the feud in different ways, yet connected by it. The final images, a graffiti tag on a Glasgow wall reading "Lyons for Life," and across the world, a makeshift shrine of flowers outside Monaghan's bar in Spain, where expats have left notes pleading "no more violence."